In today's video, we're taking a look at teams like the New York Islanders, Tampa Bay Lightning, and Columbus Blue Jackets and how they're going to handle their salary cap and injury situations. We're also going to be taking a look at the Detroit Red Wings, who are expected to add another player either through trade or free agency. And where will Alexander Ovechkin end his career? The answer might surprise you. We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we're taking a look at a handful of teams here with tight cap situations, some injury situations as well, and trying to figure out how they might be able to get through and handle these situations. Now, first up, we're going to analyze the New York Islanders. They're a fascinating team to take a look at right now. Of course, we've seen them sign Ryan Pulock yesterday to a 2-year, $5 million deal, and now the big one is left to center Matthew Barzal, who could very well be their franchise player for the next decade if they can get him, locked up to the right contract longer term here. Clearly, Barzal was probably trending towards a $9 to $10 million contract prior to the pandemic and the NHL pause, and now with the market kind of being adjusted here because of the lost revenue and all of that, we're probably looking at, I'm going to estimate somewhere maybe between 7.5 and 9 would be my best guess. I wouldn't think that the Islanders would want to go much more than that, but then again, he has some bargaining power and very well could sit out if he's not signed, could accept an offer sheet, so they do have to be wary of some other scenarios that certainly could pop up. Thankfully, they're in a position that there's not very many teams out there that could do an offer sheet, but as we've talked about, if it does happen, my money would be on New Jersey based on what we've heard out of the other rumblings from around the NHL. Now, of course, we also discussed before some potential buyout scenarios, and the Islanders now have a buyout period coming up here very shortly where they could buy out another contract as long as it's valued at $4 million or more. So that eliminates the possibility of potentially buying out a player like a Thomas Hickey or Leo Komarov, who would give them some extra salary cap space, but at the same time not really quite enough, but it would certainly be a help. And then you have guys like, obviously, Andrew Ladd is another strong possibility they could take a look at. Johnny Boychuk making $6 million. There's been some talk of could Andrew Ladd go on long-term injury reserve and get cap relief that way. But to me, I'm not sure that that's going to be an option. I mean, theoretically, Ladd did play in the playoffs. We don't have any reason to believe right now that he's suddenly going to be unable to continue playing. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's something else insiders know that we don't. I'm not sure, but I'd be a little bit surprised. I don't think that's something they can bank on unless they have some kind of health reports that we're not aware of, because that would obviously be a massive help if they were able to put Ladd on long-term injury reserve and get $5.5 million cap relief. With the 3.9 they have now, they'd be all set, but I don't believe that is going to be a scenario we're going to see. So when it comes to using a buyout, the most logical scenario would be probably Nick Leddy on defense, maybe even a Jordan Eberle, to be honest. But at the same time, I'm sure Lou Lamoriello's first preference would be to trade these players instead, or even move Ladd or Boychuk if they're able to, because clearly that's the better way to go. Move the contract to another organization, but it's not going to be easy. There's not a lot of teams that have the space. You're probably going to have to ante up some pretty good sweeteners in there. We're talking first-round picks and prospects. It's just going to be really difficult to do. Like, you have to question how much can they give up to keep Barzal. I mean, they already seen John Tavares go out the door. Obviously, they've been a better team since that happened. So at the end of the day, I'm not sure it's the worst thing in the world that happened to the franchise, even though many people thought it was at the time. So clearly, at this stage of the game, Lou Lamoriello is going to have to make some pretty drastic and tough decisions here. Now, like I said, we'll probably know in the next day or so if a buyout is going to be happening, and if so, who that player is going to be. There's a lot of talk about Boychuk previously being bought out or traded. That the buyout never came, and the trades never happened, even though we were led to believe before, around the time free agency was first starting, that there were some interested parties. I'm not sure who exactly they were or what the trade package exactly entailed, but it's never happened. Now, it's also believed that the Islanders have verbal deals with guys like Matt Martin to return. They've also got a contract lined up with Corey Schneider to come in as an extra depth goaltender. Veteran defenseman Andy Green, who they acquired from New Jersey at the NHL trade deadline. So those are basically believed to be like kind of in the drawer right now. They're not filed with the NHL. They want to leave as much space open as possible. Basically, in case Barzal does sign an offer sheet, they need to be able to act quickly. So those are not going to be filed with the league until a later date, but they have agreements all in principle in place and will be accepted and made official as soon as they're able to, and that might be a little while. These players are going to have to kind of be patient here while this whole process unfolds. Now, if you look around the NHL, there's certainly a few teams as well, especially based on injuries that we've seen announced recently, like the Jackets that we're going to talk about, and the Dallas Stars, and others that are probably going to be able to create some space through the long-term injury reserve relief program. So, perhaps they could also take a look to dump a forward, like I said, maybe like a Jordan Eberle or a Nick Leddy. I mean, Leddy, to me, based on what he's making, I'm not sure there's as much value there. And I think that they probably don't really want to move him either, given the fact that they had to trade away Devon Taves. So you move Taves, you move Leddy, you try to move Boychuk. There's just, that blue line's getting a little thin and not a whole ton of experience back there. So I think they'd probably rather subtract from the forward group if they have to move a salary in order to sign Barzal. And I would think like your most likely candidates would be Eberle or maybe Bailey. But based on how they've played, Eberle to me would probably be the first preference. He's been somewhat inconsistent, hasn't exactly been the greatest playoff performer. I think overall, the fans seem to be kind of mixed on him, and for the most part, I don't think anybody would be too upset if Eberle had to go in order to keep Matthew Barzal. So, I mean, Eberle's a player who could possibly thrive in another market, and maybe a team comes to the Islanders and gives him the opportunity to be that middle six forward for them for a very cheap acquisition cost, and that really could help Lou get out of cap jail in a way there. So that's certainly another scenario that we very well could see. I think Eberle could become a cap casualty here, given the fact that there's no trade protection in his contract as well. So we'll see how the Islanders get themselves out of trouble here. But one of the teams we're going to talk about next could be a team that they actually could even possibly do business with, which is division rival, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Of course, we reported yesterday that Gustav Nyquist is going to be out for around 6 months after having a pretty serious surgery on his shoulder, and there's been some talk now what the Jackets are going to do to replace that offense. Clearly, they were a team who made some cap space early on into the offseason and haven't really done anything too significant in return. It's believed they were kind of looking at doing something bigger, and it just never came to be. So there's obviously talk that we mentioned yesterday that they could be one of the big players for Mike Hoffman, because there was some belief that they were already kind of kicking tires on possibly signing him if they can get him for the right price. But Aaron Sportsline of The Athletic, who covers the Jackets closely, has reported that he feels that Jarmo Kekalainen isn't a huge fan of free agency, that he might be more likely to take care of adding a player through trade instead. Might be the more likely scenario that we see unfold. I still think signing Hoffman is a possibility, but if you look at the fact here with Columbus, they very well could go to a team like the Islanders that we just talked about, or other teams like Tampa or even Vegas that have players that they likely do need to move, that they can get a really low acquisition cost. Like we're looking at, looking at Tampa Bay, like they are also in the same boat where they get to sign Cirelli, Sergachev, and Chernak. And like the Islanders have next to no cap space to make it happen, and they're going to have to dump some salary to do it. But the problem with Tampa, unlike the Islanders, is that they have all these players tied up with no trade clauses. So if they could convince a guy like an Alex Killorn, for example, who actually only has a modified no trade, if Columbus is not on that list, they might be able to send him along to Columbus. He'd be a terrific fit for what they're looking to replace here in Nyquist. I mean, really, Killorn can be a 25 to 30 goal scorer. Even if he gives them 25 goals and 50 points, I mean, that's a solid year for Killorn. Solid replacement for Nyquist in the Jackets lineup. I think he'd be a terrific fit in Columbus. So certainly another option. You can look to Vegas, a guy like Marchessault and Pacioretty. Both names have been out there throughout the offseason. Maybe they would be a team that the Jackets could talk to as well. I mean, they're both players that had been out there in the rumor mill. We know that Fleury's not going anywhere now with Vegas, which was the way we figured they'd get themselves out of cap trouble, but they've confirmed he's not being traded. They're sticking with him and Leonard for next season, so it's going to have to come from another direction. Likely not the blue line, based on the fact that Shea Theodore is not going to go anywhere. They just signed Pietrangelo. They already moved Nate Schmidt. So, could Vegas move another forward? It's certainly a possibility, because they could certainly need some more flexibility. And we've heard both of the other names like Marchessault, Pacioretty, and others out there throughout the offseason. So it's certainly quite a possibility we could see Columbus go down the route of a trade to one of these teams here that have severe cap issues and get that player for next to nothing, which is quite a possibility depending on who they are. So like I said, those are the three most likely candidates that we would see. And maybe Jordan Eberle of the Islanders. Maybe they go after Marchessault, Pacioretty, or some of the other players here in Tampa, like I mentioned. So look for Columbus to possibly be looking to the trade market to replace Nyquist's production here in the short term. Now, Detroit's another team as well that we likely are going to see continue to be active here. Now, Steve Yzerman, of course, got Anthony Mantha signed, and he also made it known before when he acquired Mark Stahl and signed Bobby Ryan, and he was still open for business and wasn't going to be done after acquiring Mark Stahl from the Rangers. He indicated that they have the cap space and they have the ability to take on contracts that other teams might want to move, and if they can, acquire some extra assets, whether it be draft picks or young prospects to add to their system and help with their rebuild, that's something he's all ears to listen to. Of course, the prime team for him to talk to would be his old mates in Tampa. Of course, he knows that team extremely well after being the GM there for so many years. Obviously, maybe a guy like a Tyler Johnson or an Alex Killorn could go to Detroit. That's another possibility. Also, he'd be familiar with a lot of their young prospects that they might have to add in as a sweetener. I know he'd probably have a hard time convincing his old friend Julian Breezeball to trade Sergachev or Sorelli to him, but it wouldn't be shocking to see the Lightning and the Red Wings hook up on a deal. There was a lot of rumors earlier in the offseason that Detroit very well could take a player from the Lightning to give them the salary cap relief that they need and then trade him back at a later date into the season sometime and retain some salary to make it more feasible as well. I really don't think we'd see that happen. I don't think we're going to see Steve Yzerman dip his toe into something that's kind of borderline, not really illegal per se, but, something that could be frowned upon by the NHL. But either way, those two teams know each other incredibly well. Yzerman's indicated he's likely going to continue to be busy. Signing Dmitry Timashov is also an option. He's another player that they have, but he's indicated that Timashov is exploring his other options, which very well could include playing over in a European League or KHL, and he's not quite sure what his future holds, but he is a possibility to re-sign in Detroit and come back for another opportunity here. Now, lastly here, I want to touch on Alexander Ovechkin, the Capitals captain, who very well could be one of the more interesting players to watch over the next year as he's due a contract extension with the Capitals. We've already heard some tidbits of information on negotiations throughout this offseason that he's looking for big-time money. Ideally, would like to be paid comparable to Connor McDavid, is what we had reported out of Russia before. And there was reports that the Capitals were closer to like that $9 to $10 million range. So there's a fairly big gap between what the Caps were offering and what Ovi was looking for. Now, of course, all that aside, he did another interview with a Russian media outlet and talking about how he'd like to finish up his career, how he sees the rest of everything playing out. And what he said, I thought was interesting and might even surprise some of you, but he sees himself finishing his career in the KHL playing for his old team, Dynamo Moscow. He said that he only sees himself playing for two teams, and that's the Dynamo team over in the KHL and the Capitals in the NHL. So I don't think he's in danger of jumping ship from the Capitals to another NHL franchise. I think that would be really odd to see a player of his magnitude change team. Not that it couldn't happen. Of course it could, but very unlikely here. But it seems like whatever contract he decides to do with the Capitals next, like for term-wise, if they can come to terms on an extension, that he likely will sign for another, he said basically, 2, 3, 4 years. Didn't really know exactly how long it would be. But of course he said health permitting, so if he can stay healthy and continue, he'd like to finish up playing. Didn't say how long, but I'm assuming at least one season over in Russia before his career is all over. So he did indicate he had some more things he wanted to accomplish first. Like I said, and obviously open to an extension here with the Capitals. But obviously with a big gap between what each player in the team are looking for and that contract extension with the Capitals, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I wonder if he would use going back to Russia as any kind of leverage trying to get what he wants from Washington. And based on how good of a player he's been and how strong of a goal scorer, brought him the Stanley Cup, I would think that he really should be able to get what he wants out of Washington. I'm not sure I'd pay him Connor McDavid money at that stage of his career, but he's still one of the, playing at such a high level, it's hard to say that he's really had any kind of a decline at all. I mean, outside of the 1 year where his numbers were down, and that was when Dale Hunter was briefly coaching the Capitals, which he tried a whole different system and managing Ovi a whole different way. Otherwise, the guy's been a machine and really hasn't really slowed down any. So we'll see what happens. Certainly something we could see with Ovechkin is maybe not finishing his career in the NHL after all, and spending some time over in Russia before it's all said and done. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today, and we can discuss further down in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.